as your governor, I think you all know, I'm not afraid to face the hard truths. A lot of people, push and pull, and they like to do things the same way they're always been done. I'm challenging people for West Virginia to continue to rise, right? Right now, West Virginia ranks 27th nationally in per pupil spending. That's more than $16,500 per student. I want that to sink in for a minute. That's not an area we're in the bottom in terms of our funding. When adjusted for regional cost, we spend slightly above the national average. Over the last 5 years, the legislature has increased education funding by more than $270 million. Just important for people to know that. Yet, our results are among some of the worst in the country. Only 21% of our 8th graders are proficient in reading. Only 18% are proficient in math. We rank near the bottom in a lot of these categories. We've also seen some real problems across West Virginia. Over 9 different school boards taken over. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. It's unacceptable what's been happening across West Virginia. But I would argue the problem isn't spending, it's how our system is structured and managed. And I think that there's a better way that we can have more accountability for our kids and make sure that our kids are benefiting from all the many dollars that are being spent. I think one of the challenges we have is with our state school board. Our state board of education is unelected and independent from the rest of government. They have very long terms that are set forth under the Constitution, 9 years. That's actually far longer than other states. And I think it makes it harder for that body to be accountable when our students start to falter. We need to reform and change the system if we ever hope to improve. Now, we know there are challenges. Enrollment has declined by more than 11%. Yet non-teaching staff levels have continued to grow. Teachers now make up a smaller share of school employees than they did 2 decades ago. Think about that. The result? There's too much money in bureaucracy while teacher pay remains too low. That's not acceptable, and it's not sustainable. That's why we're putting a lot of energy into initiatives this year, and we're going to have a big announcement today. We're advancing an education-first agenda that's going to put kids out in front. We're looking out for our kids. That's top of line. We're looking out for teachers, and we want to put West Virginia on a level playing field with the rest of the country. Now, as you may have heard during my State of the State, I've called for fully funding the Hope Scholarship, not as a temporary program. We're building it into the budget so that the dollars can't just be accessed during surplus. That's what's been happening. Now that it's fully funding, we need to get those dollars in there, and I'm going to work hard to make that happen. I'm working to collaborate with the legislature to ensure that that happens. And we want to build it permanently into the baseline. We're also working to prepay next year's scholarships, Hope Scholarships, to provide certainty to families. People don't realize this, but at the beginning of every fiscal year, we actually have to borrow money because the first couple of years there's very little money available, and we borrow money in order to meet some of our existing needs. You borrow that out of the rainy day, the contingency, and you find a way to make sure that your existing monthly expenses are met. And then it gets paid back, of course, because revenues pick up as the year goes forward. But we want to make sure that those dollars are prepaid, and that's really critical. But listen, we have to also be strong on public education. That's critical. And that's why we have a number of initiatives we're proud to work with the legislature on. One of them, it's actually an initiative Delegate Statler, you've worked on for a while, that I was really encouraged about when I started to talk to the governors of Mississippi and Louisiana and saw some of the results. It's a program called Letters. It's an approach grounded in the science of reading. It's a really good program. I saw statistics that Mississippi was going from 49th, and they shot into the top 10. Talked to the Louisiana governor. He was talking about the impact that it had in his state. I'm told South Carolina. There are a lot of states that are doing this. This isn't about theory or ideology. It's a proven strategy. It's a way to make sure that we're teaching kids in what they're most receptive to learn about. I think it could be very effective for West Virginia, and I'm looking forward to working with the legislature to make that happen. We need to have a stronger education system, and letters is going to really help make that happen. I think you also know that we've put into our budget a 3% pay raise, and that's important as well. That's for all state workers, and that's not just to recruit and retain great teachers, but it's also going to help make life more affordable for everyone out there. When you combine the 3% increase for teachers and what we did on PIA, which we limited it to 3% this year, and remember, the PIA is off a much lower base. Don't believe people that start to conflate those 3%. You do those two things, and you do the tax cut that I'm talking about. Combined, that's going to put a lot more money in people's pocket. That's going to make life more affordable for West Virginians. These are the things that we need to work on. We're also calling for common sense reforms to our truancy laws, because kids can't learn if they're not in the classroom, right? And because kids who are physically active perform better in the classroom, we're advancing legislation to reinstate the presidential fitness test in schools. We want our kids to set real goals, to work hard, and to attain those goals. Finally, we've opted West Virginia into President Trump's Education Freedom Tax Credit. This was in the big, beautiful bill, and it's the first federal school choice program in American history. We're pleased to work with the Trump administration to make that happen. I think that's going to be yet another tool in the toolbox to help West Virginia kids out. Beginning in 2027, that program is going to enable new private dollars to flow directly into the Mountain State for tuition, for tutoring, and the educational options that they deserve. And I do want to go back to the letters legislation for a moment. That's a really good bill, and I'm hopeful that people are going to focus on it. Read it and let me know your thoughts, but we have to be thinking about ways to move the needle, and letters is proven to do so, but there's another piece to that as well. We're trying to utilize technology to do more tutoring for our kids, and we could do that in a very cost-effective way. And so I ask every legislator to take a look at it. It can make a real difference. A lot of this tutoring that we're talking about has really helped in a lot of school districts across the country. I think it can help here. And these are practical things to improve test scores and to help our kids, instead of some of the other practical, non-practical things that we're hearing about. One final point that I wanted to mention. I talked about the school board a little bit earlier. When you have 9 or 10 school districts in the condition they're in, you know, it starts to raise serious questions, doesn't it? What's going on? What's happening with the oversight? I know that when I first heard about what was going on in Hancock County, I said, you know, we have to make sure that we're on top of all of that. We're looking at the dollars and cents. And a lot of the counties we saw had the one-time money from COVID, but they just kept spending and spending. And who's overseeing that? I know when it came to the announcement we saw about special ed, I looked back and I said, you know, I spent a lot of time on the budget, right? We have a great budget team. I work with them. And I went back, and this morning I went and talked to Mike McCown. I said, hey, Mike, did we ever get any heads up from the school board that there was this massive need of hundreds of millions of dollars? The answer was no. Now, the governor's charged with putting a budget together for you, right, to review. That's one of our requirements. But we don't get heads up over these kinds of problems. It starts to raise questions, and we'd like to be brought in sooner. I think the legislature would like to be brought in sooner. When people talk about accountability, I'm more convinced than ever the legislature needs oversight of the school board. I think a lot of legislators in this room agree with that. We need more accountability. And I think the failures that we've seen are unacceptable, and I want to make sure that we change that. It's for all of these reasons that I'm very proud to make another announcement today. The school board, a lot of the votes you've seen are 9-0. Well, this is my first pick for the school board. I'm going to tell you, Dr. Paul, I'm hopeful to see some more 8-1 votes. We're beginning a change. We're going to begin to see things, and maybe through your leadership, we can start to really tackle even more of these issues and look out for our kids even more. We need to improve what's going on in education. We need to improve the oversight. We need to be laser focused on helping our kids. And that's why I'm so excited to announce that I'm appointing Dr. James Paul to the West Virginia State Board of Education. Dr. Paul brings deep experience in education policy, a commitment to accountability, a lot of the issues we've talked about. We talked about that on the phone. A clear understanding of the board's constitutional role and obligations, very important. To implement the laws passed by the legislature and to help provide responsible oversight of our education system, right? I believe, Dr. Paul, you're going to work, and I hope you're going to bring, there are a lot of good people that are part of the Board of Ed. I'm looking forward to you finding those people, working with them, and making good things happen. What's that going to do? That's going to help move our schools forward. It's going to help us drive educational outcomes up higher and help ensure that the kids that are coming out of school, they're aligned with our needs for our state economy. So, Dr. Paul, I'm so happy. We took the time to get this right, and I wanted someone who has really a wonderful and a deep pedigree on education policy, and who I think shares the same values of a lot of people here in this room. So, Dr. Paul, I'd love for you to come up and say some words. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Good afternoon. Governor Morrisey, thank you for this appointment. I'm very grateful for your confidence. This is something I don't take lightly. It's a big responsibility. And thank you for your leadership on education and other issues here in the state. I've worked, as you mentioned, I've worked in education policy for quite some time. I've studied educational issues. I've helped launch West Virginia's first public charter schools. And all of these experiences have taught me something very important. People in state capitals, people on boards and commissions, legislators, they don't have all the answers. And they likely never will, but we all still have a very important responsibility. And that is a responsibility to set, when it comes to education, to set a clear vision, to build strong foundations for our students' learnings, to set high standards. And once we've done that, step back, let educators do their work, let families have the power to choose, because it's parents, it's families who ultimately know their kids best and know what works best for their children. Now, having said that, the State Board of Education has a role to play here, a very clear constitutional role, as you mentioned. And it carries out the law that the legislature passes through rulemaking and provides general supervision over the public school system. And I intend to approach that responsibility with a lot of humility and a lot of respect for our democratic system, for how our democracy here in West Virginia is supposed to work. We know that our education system is changing. It has changed a lot in West Virginia, nationally, but especially here in West Virginia. Traditional public schools, as the governor mentioned, have long faced challenges, academic challenges, attainment challenges. The governor mentioned consolidations, closures, state board takeovers, and in no small part because of those challenges, We have seen a lot of new educational options take root in the state, made possible by the recent legislatures. We have charter schools, which I've been very closely involved with here in West Virginia. Obviously, we have the Hope Scholarship. We have an increase in homeschooling. And all of these new options, I strongly believe this, and I know it to be true, all of these options that parents now have, they can strengthen, and they are strengthening our education system, not weaken it. They complement it. They make it better for everyone. I've seen this firsthand. I've studied this. When families have choices, all schools respond by improving and by better meeting the needs of the families that are in those schools. And there's just something inherently so valuable and so important about protecting a parent's right to decide where they're going to send their child to school. And that's something that I will focus on in my role in the state board. Now, just as these different school options that we now have in West Virginia don't need to be at odds with each other, this is not Hope Scholarship versus traditional public schools, or these are not at odds with each other. I believe that the legislature and the state board don't need to be at odds with each other either, and in fact, that shouldn't be the case. And if we're going to serve West Virginia families well, if we're going to serve them as best as our kids deserve, the state board and the legislature have to work together constructively. In many places in our West Virginia code, the state board is told to constructively engage, is the term, with the legislature, and that's something that I'm not going to lose sight of. That's something that I intend to do. My priorities are pretty straightforward. Simple rulemaking that respects and honors legislative intent. Simple rulemaking. If you've seen any of the rules from the State Board of Education, they can be quite complicated. Strong standards that support civic virtue, civic values, civic excellence in our kids. Of course, high standards, academic standards that promote academic excellence for our kids. The governor mentioned careful stewardship of taxpayer funds and an oversight of those funds, very important role on the state board. And something that has not been mentioned yet but is very important to me is looking to Washington, particularly this administration in Washington, to take advantage of opportunities for flexibility from federal rules, regulations. Washington is telling the states, you can get flexibility. There are ways to make things run more efficiently. There are ways to support our state education agencies, not have to deal with so much paperwork and compliance, and I'll be looking for ways to work with the other members of the state board and Washington for that type of flexibility that can help our kids. As I said at the beginning, I don't believe Charleston can dictate or legislate better academic outcomes into existence, but what we all can do and what I'll try to do is set high expectations for students, insist on academic rigor, favor common sense over ideology, and make sure that families are able to fully access all the options that are now available to them in our state, whether they're traditional public schools, non-public schools. We need to make sure that we're doing everything that puts kids first, and that's what I'll focus on. So I'm very excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think this is going to be a home run pick. I'm really excited, and I'm grateful for all of the encouragement we've seen as people know this is step one, I think, to begin to improve what's been happening. And I'm willing to work with anyone to make sure we put the educational needs of our kids first. This is so important. And so I really believe you're going to make a difference on that board, and I thank you for your willingness to serve. So at the end of the day, all the things we're doing, they're about putting our kids first. We want our kids to graduate with the schools that they need and then get involved in our economy, and we want them to stay in West Virginia a long time. I could say as a new grandfather, I share a lot of hopes, not only for my own granddaughter, but for children across our great state. I see a lot of members of the legislature here today. I want to thank you for those who are working with this on this mission. I think what we're talking about today is common sense and should bring people together. But this is the time we begin to challenge the status quo. It's not just money. Money's important, but there's a lot of money already in the system. We have to handle this the right way. And if we want to continue that economic momentum we're talking about, we have to make sure our schools are producing the graduates who are ready to succeed.